All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Boom, and welcome to the Big Honker Podcast, brought to you by Pacific Game Calls, right here in the big city of Knox City, Texas. I'm Jeff Stanfield with the world-famous Andy Shaver.
That's right. I'm here.
No, it's a good place to be, huh?
Yeah.
With us today from Austin, Texas, home of the Texas Longhorns. Did they beat y'all this weekend? Or did y'all win? Okay, take one. Mr. Robert Youens. Robert, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How y'all guys doing?
Well, I'm doing better than I was Saturday when I had to listen to these tech people talk shit all day. So
get your guns up, baby. Get your guns up.
That.
Okay, Robert, you are a self-described adventurer. You're retired, and you said you did your first adventure was you floated down the Mississippi River by yourself, or not floated. I guess you paddled down the Mississippi River by yourself, which makes more sense than paddling up it. You paddled down it. Where did you put in, and where'd you go? Tell us that story.
Starting before that, I've been an adventurer all my life. Since I was 10 years old, I was running flat bottom boats out into the bays and stuff, and rode my bicycle out to the West Coast when I graduated from high school. But the adventure I think you're referring to is upon my first retirement, I think it was in 2008, I flew up to Minnesota and bought a canoe and launched in Lake Itasca and paddled it down to the Gulf of Mexico.
How long did that take?
Spent 89 days camping out on the river. It was really nice.
Hey, did you just eat fish, or did you buy stuff in town? Did you stop and buy stuff to eat, or how'd that work?
I typically, stop in town and buy enough food for several days, and put enough water in the boat for several days, and head on downstream till I needed something else. I'm not a really big fisherman. I love to eat fish, and I can generally find someone to give me some of theirs.
So that you're not a fisherman, but you will eat fish. What time of year did you do this?
I do it when I do most of my adventures. I did it in the fall, and I did that trip specifically to see the fall colors that we don't get to see in Texas. And I rode the fall colors all the way down the river. It was really, really nice.
I crossed the Mississippi in, I guess, February of this year, and we crossed a little town it was up by Brainerd, north of there, and the Mississippi River was just a trickle there. It was, you could jump across it.
Yeah, it is a teeny river. We ended up dragging like the first probably close to 15 miles, dragging large portions of it, and then it becomes bigger and bigger and turns into this huge Goliath of a river we have down on the coast.
How what was the work? Do you remember like what state you would have been in where the Mississippi River was the most treacherous?
The most turbulent I remember is in Arkansas when some of the rivers are coming into the river, because there was a lot of speed coming in there and a lot of river turbulence in that area.
And so that was the worst part. What?
Well, there was it's a pretty passive, huge river. There's some rapids up in the upper section in Minnesota, but in the lower river, it's the thing you're going to get is these huge turbulences as side rivers come into it.
Now, which lake did you start off in? I'm looking at a map here, and I'm trying to figure this out.
It's called Lake Itasca. It's considered the headwaters of the Mississippi. There's a state park there in Minnesota.
Okay, I'm looking. There's all kinds. I can't figure it out, but it's got to be.
No, it's a teeny. It's in the far western portion of Minnesota. It's over there near Fargo, North Dakota.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at right now. That was a long deal. So you had to go through Minneapolis.
Yeah, it took it was 500 miles just to get to Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Wow.
And it was actually through that section I had a partner for the first 500 miles, and then he went as far as Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then I dropped him off at the airport, or stopped the canoe by the airport, and then did the rest of it solo.
And then you went from there, and then the next big town, I guess, would have been it's on the border of, there's a college town there, and I can't remember the name of it. It's the Wisconsin Minnesota border. You go through that town too, because that's where it starts getting really wide.
Yeah, I can't remember all the little towns. That's been so many years ago now. But I mean, from time to time, I go back up there, and there were towns that I made friends in, and they've become lifelong friends.
I'm thinking of Winona, Minnesota, is what I'm thinking of.
Winona, yeah, actually, they make Winona canoes there, Z-pack tents and backpacks, and cool town. A lot of people like us, the outdoor adventure type. Actually, the guys from the Winona canoe plant came over and picked me up and gave me a tour of the plant.
Were you ever bored on this excursion?
On the Mississippi River?
Yeah. Well,
no. Every day it's like, you know, the beauty of being out there in the wilderness and, you know, seeing the beavers come in slapping their tails in the morning because you're in their spot and, you know, just all the wildlife and stuff. No, never get bored of that. That's, in fact, that's what I live for, man.
Really?
Did you run into any waterfowl hunters while you were doing this?
I did. I happened to, since I came through in the fall, I ran into lots of duck hunters.
You must be getting a phone call.
River public access property. So yeah, ran into lots. In fact, if you watch my video on the Mississippi River trip, you'll see a little section where I visit with a hunter.
Did you ever get nervous or scared on this? Was there any kind? Because rivers are known for some pretty shady things, like in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yeah, I generally made it a point not to camp in cities, so I would camp outside of cities. But no, I never had a moment that I was concerned. I had more moments where I was elated. I'd be camping on the side of the river, and a guy'd yell down, "Hey, bud, what are you doing down there?" It's like, well, paddling the Mississippi. He says, "Come on up to our deer camp, man. Have a few beers." So that was more often the circumstance. I slept in more people's camps and campers and stuff. Everyone wanted to, you know, become part of the story and give me a beer, and I generally took them up on it.
Did you have any personal protection when you were on this? Did you have a pistol or bear mace, or did you have anything in case things went sideways?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I took some bear mace because up in the other northern Minnesota area, you've got some grizzlies up in that section, and my wife was real worried about that. But I didn't carry a weapon or anything.
What about a cell phone? Did you have a cell phone?
Yeah, I had a cell phone. I had a satellite communication device, and I had VHF radio so I could talk to the boats on the river.
We had a guy. Where was he from? Where was he? He fished in South America.
Oh, the guy from
yeah, good guy. And
I can't think of the guy that hunted with us.
Yeah, sure. And they have Wi-Fi there, but it's only enough bandwidth to basically make like a phone call if you had to. So he doesn't tell anybody that he has Wi-Fi down there, just in case he's got to use has to use it to get a phone call out for sinking ship or pirates hitting them or whatever.
Well, nowadays all the adventurers use the Garmin inReach. It's the standard device for satellite communication. It's texting apparatus.
Well, what did you when you're on this vacation, this adventure down the Mississippi River? There's some serious boat traffic the further south you get. I guess from St. Louis on, it becomes pretty boat traffic heavy. Is that where it really changed the river?
Yeah, everyone, as I was coming in, I actually knew one towboat captain, and everyone was warning me, don't go through the industrial zone below St. Louis. And there's about a 9-mile stretch where there's they do a lot of reorganizing the tow loads and stuff, and a lot of industry in there. And I just put on a really bright safety vest, and I call ahead with the radio and just let all the captains know ahead of me that I'm coming through. And I found out if I would just talk to the boat traffic, they would kind of call out ahead and say, "Hey, there's going to be a John boat," or I've done it by John boat also, but there's going to be a canoe coming through. And I never had any problems personally. Got along real well with the towboat captains.
So So you get to St. Louis, then it's to Memphis. Did you go all the way to Venice, Louisiana, or did you cut off at New Orleans?
No, I went all the way to the end, all the way down to the South Pass, past Port Eads and into the Gulf.
That's got to be some rough stuff there. How big was your canoe?
It is a 17-foot Alumacraft, kind of the standard thing. It's a big area. The river's really wide right there at mile zero, where the three branches of the river split off to the different passes. And I would guess it's probably a mile and a half wide there, but I don't know. It's just something you kind of get used to, spending that much time on big water, and you just stay over to the side, stay outside of the traffic lanes.
And you said it's a mile and a half wide there?
It might be wider. It's really wide right there where the mile zero, where the Southwest Pass, South and Southeast passes all leave. And that's about 10 miles below Venice.
And so I can't believe you can go that far south of there. So you were already you were basically in the salt water there. Then did you turn around and row back to Venice? Is that what you did?
Actually, the South Pass used to be really a big sport fishing hub place. And when I did it, I was able to catch a ride back with a sport fisherman. And he dropped me off there at the boat ramp in Venice. And I'd left a car there in Venice at a hotel a couple of months earlier when I headed out. So I just got a ride up to my car.
That's amazing story right there. And that's not even the best story we got. This is the first part. That is an amazing adventure to go from the start of the Mississippi all the way to now. Paddling down is not so bad because I'm assuming a lot of times you were just keeping with the current, basically, especially after you got to St. Paul.
Yeah, the whole Mississippi River's got good current. I mean, it's not unusual to have a 3-4 mile per hour current. But I was a canoe racer for many years. I don't know if y'all guys heard of the Texas Water Safari, but I've done that 17 times. So I've got a lot of experience canoe racing also.
Canoe racing, what do you do? How's that work?
Okay, well the race I used to train for is called the world's toughest canoe race. It's the Texas Water Safari. It leaves San Marcos, Texas, and you go nonstop till you hit the coast down near Seadrift, Texas, just up the coast from Corpus Christi. So it's 48 hours. The fastest time I did was a 46-hour on a 6-man boat. But I've done it solo several times, mixed. But it's just a really well-known race if you're in the canoe racing world, and I just have always enjoyed being competitive.
So after you did all this, you decided, hey, you woke up one day and said, hey, I'm going to go to the Arctic Circle and do this.
It's I have a big old bucket list of kind of fun things I want to do, and heading up to the Arctic was just one of the many. And I actually started thinking about it about 3 or 4 years ago, and then COVID hit, and you couldn't get into the Arctic. They just shut it down. And but yeah, the opportunity came up, and everything stars aligned where I could leave and head out because I was planning on being gone up to 3 months.
Now, when this Arctic adventure started, where did you put in for that at?
Hardly anyone knows anything about the upper Canadian Arctic zone. Even the Canadians didn't know about it when I was talking to them. But basically, it was where Canada meets Alaska. There's a Mackenzie River comes through there, and at where the Mackenzie River flows into the Arctic Ocean is a little town called Tuktoyaktuk. And they just opened a road less than 10 years ago. There's the Dempster Highway that leaves the Alcan Highway and goes for about 500 miles. And then there's another 150-mile highway from Inuvik all the way up to the Arctic Ocean. So it's 650 miles of some of the roughest gravel road you've ever driven in your life. But you can drive from Austin, Texas, 4,700 miles if you have the gumption, and you can launch your boat right there at the boat ramp and tuck.
And so you drove from Austin to this place, and then you put in basically is it in Canada or is it right there in Alaska?
It's in Canada. It's in the Northwest Territory.
But you're right by Alaska.
You're within, like Point Barrow and Prudhoe Bay. You're in that area, yeah. But I was probably maybe 30 miles east of the Alaskan border.
Okay.
Now, how long did it take you to get there from Austin?
I had driven most of that before, so I just kind of did a marathon drive. I made it up there in 6 days, if you can imagine that.
That would be that'd be a fun adventure to me just to drive that far. Was it gravel roads the last?
Yeah, I just flew till I got to the Dempster Highway, which I hadn't seen. And once I got on that gravel road, you're following the Mackenzie River and the Peel River, and you're crossing the Arctic Circle while you're on that road. It was amazing. Talked to lots of fishermen that were just kind of driving down the road and running down to the Mackenzie River and Peel and fishing off there, catching Arctic grayling and all sorts of really cool fish.
Now, opportunity to buy a gas station and buy a burrito like at Allsup's are probably few and far between up there, right?
It's I carried 10 gallons of extra fuel in my boat, and just about everyone you saw that was on the Dempster Highway had extra spare tires and extra fuel, because it's a long way between anything.
That's what's amazing about the people that are, well, even the people that are up there now and the people that have lived there in the past, is just how self-reliant they are.
They have to be, but the other thing that is there is everyone helps everyone.
Right.
You might live in Austin and not know your neighbors, but when you're up there, you stop and help anyone that's in trouble. And I stopped a guy and helped a guy change a spare tire, and while I was helping him, 3 other cars stopped.
Really?
It's like West Texas. People stop to see.
Yeah.
People stop to see if you need help. So you get up. You get up to the place you're going to put your John boat in. You have your extra supplies, and you take off. Now, what is the temperature like? Because there's icebergs everywhere. Is it freezing weather? Does it get below freezing at night still, or is it warmed up?
Yeah, during the period I was there, I only had one night that it got below freezing, and I had some ice on my boat and stuff. But July is their hottest part of the season. It's kind of like it is here, the July 1st of August period. And that's really not the time you can boat it, because it takes a couple of months of heavy heat to, and heavy heat to them is 60 degrees, really a really warm day. So they consider the period to boat in the Arctic starting around the 1st of September.
And so once you got in the water, you started going. How far to your first, from where you launch in, how far do you go till you stop the first day?
I can travel. The furthest I've traveled in a day was 300 miles in a day, but everything has to be optimal for something like that. A typical day for me would be a couple of 100 miles. The first day I came out, I was left tuck and I went straight into the Arctic Ocean. So it's a big ocean, the potential for pretty heavy wave movement. And I did have relatively rough conditions. I was hoping to make a couple 100 miles the first day, and I think I made it 140 miles. And I had like islands spotted where there would be good places to pull into protected water. So the wind had switched out to the northwest, and so it was blowing the polar sea ice into the Beaufort Sea, and so I camped that first night and found a really safe harbor. And what I did is I just threw an anchor out, and I had a bear fence that I put up at night. plugged in PVC plugged into the perimeter of my boat, and I strung what would you'd use in Texas as a cattle fence, basically with a electric fence that I dropped the ground into the salt water and hooked the fence up, and I'd set up a tent, and I just camped in my boat.
So that was to keep the polar bears away.
Polars and grizzlies, and there's now some crossbreeds between the polars and grizzlies called prislies, and
What do they look like?
growlers. There's two terms.
What do these crossbred bears look like? Are they like brownish white?
It's sort of like some of the other crossbreed things. They whether the mother's a grizzly or a polar bear, they have different looks to them, and they have different names for them. So yeah, it looks like the pictures I've seen. I didn't see any bears the whole time, but the pictures I saw, they're kind of look like a grizzly with some white patches.
So you put in by Herschel Island. Is that close to where you put in at?
Yeah, actually, Herschel Island's on the west side of the McKenzie River, and I was, probably 70 miles, 100 miles to the east of Herschel Island.
Did you go like past the Langley Islands and the Kendall Island?
I can't remember all the names of all those island sets. I went through past thousands of island sets.
Does Cape Dahusa sound correct? Sound like a place you'd gone?
No.
Okay.
No, it really doesn't sound real familiar. I mean, the first place I can't recall. There's Pierce Point Pierce. Pierce Point was where I was hoping to go to the first day, and I ended up short of that. And that's where I ended up. The first point is you're heading east. 140 miles east of Tuck is where I ended up the first night.
Now I'm assuming you kind of have this itinerary in your head. Okay, I need to make it to here, and then I need to make it to there by the next day. Is it no?
No, not
at all. You're just like, I'm just going to go as far as it'll take me.
Well, because it's ocean, man. I mean, it's crap that'll kill you. I'm in 34-degree water. And so, no, you have to, if you're going to survive things like this, you have to have kind of a safety plan. And so I had plans that if I had trailing seas, I'd go in up to 2-foot seas. And if I had head seas, I would limit it to 1-foot head seas. So, no, I made it a commitment to myself that, I would watch the weather forecast. And I had a friend of mine I've done tens of thousands of miles of sailing with, working as my router. He's a licensed sea captain. And I would check with him each morning, and he would give me detailed forecasts and information like that. And then together, he and I would make a decision what was going to happen the next day.
How far off the coast did you go? Was you 100 yards off, a half mile, 3 miles?
If you want to get this done in any reasonable distance, because there's huge bay-looking things there. There were sometimes I was 50 to 70 miles offshore, and where I was running, 160 mile, crossing. So yeah, you have to be able to get it in your head that in 34-degree water, it doesn't matter if you're a half mile offshore or 50 miles offshore. You don't want to go in the water.
No, you're dead.
So, I mean, you're thinking, I'm not going to make that. I'm not going to make it to the bank either way. If I fall in, if I go in, I go in.
Well, no, I had planned to go in. I'd actually, the winter before, I swim every day in January and February. I've got a pool at the house. So I wanted to make sure I could handle going into ice water. And I actually put a boarding ladder on the back of my John boat. And then I had spare changes of clothes. So if I went in, I wasn't going to die. I was going to survive. My thought was more that if I lost my boat, if it sunk or came apart or something like that, I would still, have, do an emergency call out. And one of the things we didn't mention is in preparation for this trip, I had gotten in communication with Nordreg, which is their Canadian Coast Guard, and with the Arctic Communications Center. And so they had a description of my boat and everything. They were tracking my inReach tracker, so they knew where I was at every moment. And I had to do a call in every day to them. Call in, it was a text in. I would just tell them what the weather conditions were like where I was, and let them know I was all's well and what my plan was for the next day. So, and in each town I got into, I would call them and make sure that we were all cool. There's some pretty funny conversations.
Well, tell us about the towns you go into, because I'm assuming those people are not really up with Western culture, so they liked your money, I bet, though.
You'd assume wrong. It's pretty funny. You walk into the average house there. What did you see? You see a big screen TV with a sports game on, or I had lots of funny instances. But it is rustic and rural, and the towns in the Northwest Territory are dominated by local Indian tribes, segmented a little bit out from what you see further east and you see the pure Inuit people, what what most people know as an Eskimo. They're now that we call them Inuits. But I had lots of really good times with them. And I think because to have a good mental mindset living up there, you got to be an outdoorsman. You got to be an adventurer. If you're a woman, you got to be tough. You got to be used to eating and preparing meat that the men hunted. And they really do live off what they hunt, whether it's belugas or caribou or muskox. These guys are real sportsmen, and because of that, I hit it off. We just always had a fun time visiting everywhere I went.
So they speak English?
Yeah, they all watch. I was in one little town, and this guy I was told, yeah, he's the guy who can forge steel, and I said, well, is this like a tradition passed down through your family or something? And he goes, oh no, I watch it on YouTube, forge steel or something. It's like, no, they all have kind of slow internet. They can't send videos just because their internet's real slow, but they do have televisions, and they use DirecTV. The funny thing about the DirecTV there is their antennas point sideways. For them to hit where our antennas point up, for them to hit the geosynchronous satellites over the equator, they have to point straight across the horizon. It's just weird being that far north. Things are different. The magnetic pole is different up there. Here compasses work real good. Up there, the magnetic poles are turning the magnetic field, so your compasses don't work very well.
Yeah, because everything ends up being south. The further north you go, right?
Well, what happens if you remember a magnet from maybe high school or middle school science, where at the end of the magnet, the magnetic field makes a big turn down into the top. Same thing happens in the North Pole. When I was looking, and I brought my drones to do some drone imaging while I was up there, and they recommend you not fly a drone that close to the magnetic pole because the magnetic field is not horizontal there. It becomes more vertical.
I've seen where the North Pole has moved to a bunch lately.
Really?
Yep.
Well, it's going to switch.
Yeah. It actually back in the 1700s was down about where I was. It's near Joe Haven, and it's been moving for the last several hundred years. But over the last 7 years, it's moving towards Siberia at about 50 miles per year. And it's actually the magnetic pole is on the Siberian side of the physical North Pole now, and that's what allowed me to fly my drones up there without an issue.
But I mean, it's got to go back to what, South Pole dominant? Doesn't it do that every couple thousand years, and we're way overdue?
Well, I did a lot of research into that. We know that the magnetic pole is flipped somewhere between 7 to 12 times. It doesn't happen often, but it has to do with the amount of iron inside the Earth and where it's located and how it moves around. So there's a big old lump of iron in the magma of the Earth that's kind of moving over to Siberia right now.
All right, let's talk food now. As a fat boy that loves food, what's the weirdest thing that you ate on this trip?
Well, survival wise, I brought dehydrated foods, and I carried about a month and a half's worth of Mountain Home standard backpacker food, and then I bought stuff at stores. I'd buy canned meats and cookies and fruit and stuff like that, and like granola bars and stuff to eat during the day. But I got invited to have a lot of meals with family. So I had caribou, stir-fried caribou at one family's house. I got to eat Arctic char, which is kind of the fish that everyone loves up there. And you can only get it kind of in the central Arctic. And then when I was in Pawtucket, I wanted to taste the dried fish that they eat as prepared by the Inuit. And this lady goes, well, go over to that blue house right there. The guy there will give you some dried fish. And so I'll start this. So the first time I went into a town where I needed to get some fuel, I said, do you have a restroom? He goes, no, you just walk up to a house and you tell them you need to use the restroom. I said, like any house.
Pick a house.
But, yeah, just any house. Just knock on the door and say, hey, I need to use the restroom. And it worked like that. And I needed some water. I knocked on the house and said, hey, I need to get some water. Oh, you're traveling through. But I think it comes from the history of living around polar bears and stuff. And if you see a polar bear, you don't want that door to be locked. So if the kids are going to school and they see a polar bear, they can go up to the nearest house and go in. But it has to do with that helping each other out. But so I walked up this door, and the guy says, so who's giving away my fish? And I told her, well, it was Lily over there at the North store. And he says, well, come on in. And I had coffee with he and his wife, and they gave me 5 pounds of dried fish to take with me in the boat. So each morning I'd fire up some coffee and throw some dried fish in my mouth, and that fish would just melt in my mouth. It was just wonderful. I ate that for days and days.
Did you have any of the fermented fish?
Not familiar with the term fermented fish. Everything that I saw up there, they would take it and they would do the fillet, and then they would leave the skin on it, and they just cut it, just cross cut it down the fish, and then they would they'd either do one of two things. They would just take it in their house and have that. Almost all the houses had racks on the ceilings, like right in their living room. There'd be fish hanging and drying, and some of them would take the fish and drape it over racks in a smokehouse, and they would smoke it for a few days to more quickly dry it. But yeah, I wasn't. I never had fermented fish. I had muskox, really tough meat. They eat it fairly highly seasoned, and they generally grind it. Like I said, caribou. What else did I have? I had beluga whale. They generally eat that raw, and they cut it into like little chunks, sort of like you go to Louisiana and get cracklins. It was like eating raw cracklins. It was like maybe eating a raw stick of butter.
Was it difficult to get down?
It didn't.
Was it difficult to get down?
No, it actually tasted kind of good, sort of like eating cracklins, but it was raw. But no, it was good. I didn't notice that, but I eat most anything.
Did you have any seal oil while you were there?
No, I didn't. I know that they save seal oil, but killing seals generally happens during the winter, and so no, I I actually got invited to go to a wedding, and the groom was wearing a seal coat that he had killed a seal and made a kind of a vest out of it. But nope, didn't get to do seal oil, or I didn't have any seal.
How did you get invited to a wedding?
Let's see. So this is kind of later in the story, but I met 3 guys that were helping me, and 3 Inuit guys, and they were big time hunters and fishermen and everything. We really hit it off. We'd spent a lot of time together while I was stuck in this town, and we'll get into the story, the bulk of the story. But we just hit it off, and he says, "Hey, I'm getting married. You want to come to the wedding?" And I was quite honored, and so I got to go to the wedding and the reception and all. And I was expecting to see all sorts of Inuit stuff. No, it was just like going to a wedding here.
Really?
It was identical. They toss a bouquet and did all the things you'd see at a wedding here. I took lots of pictures while I was at the wedding, and I look forward to sharing those maybe in a book and videos and stuff someday.
Now, everybody I know that's spending time up north has told me that the bathing is doesn't happen very frequent up there. Did you notice that?
No, not really. They've got all the conveniences that you and I have, and there's a whole lot of misconceptions I brought up there with me, just like stuff like that. And but I stayed in their homes. Now it does get 60 below zero there, and so they do have to have lots of special provisions for this extremely cold weather. So they have a tank inside their home, typically kind of, it's either under they have their house sectioned, or maybe in the central portion of the house behind some walls, but they have a tank for holding fresh water. They have a tank for holding sewage, inside their house, so it doesn't freeze. And typically a couple of times a week, a truck comes by, pumps out sewage, and puts in fresh water. So they've got they heat their houses with diesel fuel and with a furnace that circulates a heat through heating pipes in their house, and they have access to ample supply of hot water. So when you walk in their homes, it looks just like you're walking into a home here. And they had they seemed clean to me. I showered in some of the homes.
It's just crazy how they figured out how to live in such frigid conditions. What's the coldest that you saw it when you were on your trip?
In the high 20s, but I was there during the
Right.
summer, and the average day there for me was if it was a hazy day, it'd be 39 at night and 41 in the afternoon. I had temperatures go as high on a sunny day as almost 60 degrees, and then the coldest night was in the upper 20s. So it was it was actually what I like is really comfortable to me. Running around in 30 to 50 degree weather is my spot where I perform well.
So it wasn't too terribly uncomfortable for you. You were usually in your comfort zone as far as weather goes.
Absolutely. I mean, I shared one picture with y'all where I'm out in some sea ice and it's real hazy. And yeah, y'all have spent time in small boats. When you're running, 25, 30 miles an hour over 34 degree water, it's cold. It's bitching cold. And you got every piece of clothing you own on. But so it was frigid when I was moving in the boat and I was over the really cold water. But on land, no, it's the time of year that they really get out. And there, as I entered the Arctic going up to Tuck, I saw lots of Inuit out picking berries.
Mm-hmm.
So they're competing with the bears, getting ready for winter.
How long is their summer? I mean, you got a couple days here and there, and that's basically the extent of their
3 months.
Their warm season.
They got about 4 months of what we'd call just pretty active summer to them, And by mid-October, just like fall here, it's when they start seeing their cold fronts come in, and but their ice doesn't get thick where they can like drive on the ice till like December, November, December. But by February, the sea ice in front of these villages will get up to 9 foot thick.
Wow.
Which is hard to imagine. One of the guys I met along the way was a championship snowmobiler, and he had ice cleats into his skids. And I said, "Well, where do y'all do your races?" He said, "Oh, right here in front of my house, right out there in the ocean." And I had this misconception that they traveled by kayak and boat. They really don't travel by kayak and boat. They travel by snowmobile, man. They'll go hundreds of miles. I'd see these fishing camps, which I thought were fishing camps, 100 miles from a town. No, those were hunting camps that they drove their snowmobiles to. It is amazing.
Wait, did you see the Northern Lights every night?
Well, no, I didn't see light. I mean, I didn't see darkness.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't think about
So
that.
I was up there during the all-time, when it was light all the time. When I got up to Tuck, it was 11 o'clock at night, and the sun was way up in the sky, and it would get about to the horizon and just not set, and just kind of run across the northern sky. And then at like 2:30 in the morning, it was back pretty darn bright again. It was weird.
Jeez.
Imagine the stars you could see up there when it's dark, though. Well, that would be amazing.
Problem is, the sun doesn't come up.
Yeah, talking to those guys, they said when a cold front would come through, and when it gets super cold, I'm talking like -60, the air can't hold humidity. So it just goes down to like 0% humidity. And they said it's like you can reach out and grab the stars. I talked to a lot of the young guys, the guys in the 30s that are active hunters and sportsmen and fishermen, and they wouldn't trade living up there for the world. They said, "Man, we got more game than you can imagine." They love to hunt, they love to fish. So how do you handle running at 60 miles an hour on a snowmobile? Said, "We just got the right clothes, man." So, "Well, don't you get frostbite?" "Oh yeah, we get frostbite every year." So most of them have like scars right under the bottom of their eyes, where the cold air, you can't cover that part of your face, and so they have scarring there. It's just amazing that they are willing to put up with that, but it's all they know.
Mm-hmm. But it's just crazy that they've been living this way forever. Like before modern clothing, before we figured out how to be comfortable and survive in these sort of conditions, they've just figured it out.
I've done a lot of research into history. So the first people that came over, which we call the American Indian or the Canadian Indian, they call themselves the First Nation. So they came over. And then there was a second movement of humans into our North American continent, and that was the Inuit. And they came at a later date, and they got down to the tree line, and they picked up the resistance of the Indians that were living below the tree line. So these guys just got stuck above the tree line, and the Indians that lived there called them Eskimo, and Eskimo actually means in the Indian language people that eat raw meat.
Mm.
So it was a derogatory name that the Indians gave the people above the tree line, the people that eat raw meat, and they call themselves the Inuit. And Inuit in the Inuit language means the people, and it can also be translated to the people of snow. So that's why they call themselves the Inuit, is they're the people of snow, and then the people below it are Indians.
So that's it.
And
that's interesting that Eskimo it was the Native Americans that gave us this racist term. Not the white guys. It was the racist ass Native Americans, just so that we're clear.
Yeah, that is exactly it. And then they were just as cruel as other people in the world. They slaughtered Eskimos, and they needed someone to look down upon, and they chose the Eskimos.
Poor
And
Eskimo.
so it was pretty horrible. The town of Kugluktuk, a big part of its history is they called the Coppermine River the Bloody River, and a French explorer came in with an Indian guide, and the Indian guides saw some Inuits camping on the river, and he went down that night and slaughtered 14 of them.
That's the way it is.
On the river.
That's the way the world was back then, though. It was conquered or be conquered.
It's the way it is now. It's tribal.
Yep, that's right.
But and there's still, like residual racism in almost all society. There is a residual racism between the Indian and the Inuit even today. It's much moderated by, the new society that we have now and communication. And there's like the most further north Inuit towns are there because the French Canadians didn't want them in Quebec anymore. So guess what they did? They moved them way up into the Arctic. And as we moved our Indians out west, they moved theirs north. And they did it for another reason, is the Russians and the Chinese were trying to move in on that territory and claim it for Russia and China. And the Canadian government used the Indian to hang on to that territory, or the Eskimo, the Inuit. And so there's a lot of bizarre history associated with that area, and I found that intriguing. I probably did over 150 interviews talking to Inuit about what they do, and I was very lucky to be accepted by them. When I was in Cambridge Bay, they had an athlete from Cambridge Bay win one of the wrestling classes in the Canadian Summer Games, and they had a big celebration for him, and I was invited to this celebration for just locals, and they had a big dinner, and so I had dinner with them and all that. And they first, to start off, they did the drum dance, and I thought that was a tourist thing, and no, they actually do drum dance at their own celebrations to kind of hang on to the language and the story. And just by pure chance, like 4 nights later, I was invited by a couple to stay at their house, and it was the house of the drum dancers.
Really?
So I got to learn. I said, tell me about the story. I'd talked to 2 young girls that were sitting across the table from me. They didn't know the native language enough to know what the story meant, but these people told me about this song, and they didn't have a written language. And so they use these drum dances to tell the history. I felt really honored to be accepted by these people.
That's crazy. They didn't have a written language, so they used drum beat as a way of communicating.
And to tell a story. And they, up until COVID, they would have like regional get-togethers, and they would have competitions on retelling the story. It was really, but COVID, just like there, changed a lot of stuff. It really did.
What were their feelings on COVID? Were they petrified of this, or were they?
Smoking is really a big deal up there. I'd probably say 90% of the people smoke. So because of that, there's a lot of associated lung diseases and stuff. So yeah, they did have some deaths associated with COVID. But it's just about parallels us. They had a couple of tough years, and some are vaccinated, some aren't, but they pretty much passed it now.
Because I went to St. Lucia the year after. We went to St. Lucia last October for our 10. It's an island, but anyway, they are the population there is heavy Creole. And they are very, very superstitious about things like this. So the whole island was on pins and needles, because they were scared to death that this was something that was going to wipe out the human race. So I didn't know what the Eskimo attitude was towards COVID.
they were concerned about it. And so in the 1990s, there was a huge movement by the Inuit population, and the government of Canada created a new territory called Nunavut. They separated it out, so they've got a territory that's only been in existence for 30 something years, and it is run by the Inuit. In the Inuit, when COVID hit, they just stopped travel. You were not allowed to pull into the harbor of those towns. So yeah, they were terrified. But like the rest of us, they started realizing that it was only taking out, the really sick and stuff like that, the older people, and it's.
Well, we lost you. Well,
Are you back?
yes, sir.
Okay, so let's get back. Let's tell a little story of the boat trip.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I get to this 140 miles the first night, and I'm really excited. I'm in the Arctic. I mean, I was just like so excited. I woke up with a smile that next morning. I couldn't believe it. I was a Texan in the Arctic, and so I pulled out from the little harbor I was in. And the first thing I saw were huge icebergs. I think I sent you some of the pictures of that, and they're dark blue. They're they're freshwater. They've come off of a glacier. And then I had a long crossing to do between 2 points. So I'm kind of maybe 30 miles from shore, and it was really overcast and hazy, foggy, and there was like rainbows all in the fog, and I'm running along about 20 miles an hour, and I was like, what the hell is that? And I came up on sea ice, and it was as far as I could see, which wasn't very far. I could only see like a couple 100 yards, 200 yards into it. So I thought, I wonder how big this is. So I went south, and I went south for almost 5 miles, and it was still sea ice all the way. So I turned around. I said, the wind had been blowing out of the northwest the day before, like I was telling you. So I thought, well, maybe the ice is blowing south, so I'll go north. So I went north for about 10 miles, and it was still sea ice as far as I could see. So I sat down and just kind of stopped and parked my boat. It was really calm at that time. And I was sitting there on my inReach, sending a message to my router just to see if he could see the ice on the satellite and give me some directions. And I'm sitting there typing into it, and it felt as if a large blue Suburban exited the water 4 feet from my boat to my right-hand side. It was a huge bowfin whale.
Gee.
They're about 40-foot long whales. And he just raised up the top of his head was maybe 6-7 feet in the air, and his eyeball was 4 feet from me, and he just stared at me. It was, I've got goosebumps right now just thinking about it. And he could have easily taken me out, but after looking at me, I guess solving his curiosity, the whale just slid back into the water backwards and swam away.
That's crazy.
That was on my second day in the Arctic. I saw icebergs, I saw sea ice, and I had this huge freaking whale pull up right beside me and stare at me. So, man, what an indoctrination on your second day in the Arctic. It was beyond belief.
Now, how many days total were you there? How many days total did this trip, from the time you put in to the time you got to your final spot?
Well, it was a round trip, so I left Tuck and I got back to Tuck almost exactly a month later.
Now, I'm looking at something on Garmin, and this is from your trip. How did this, because there's different there's a dot, and then there's a line, and then there's another dot. Is that when you would check in, or how does this Garmin thing that I'm looking at work, or do you have any idea?
I have that actually updating every 2 minutes.
Okay.
And you will, the closer you zoom in, the dots get closer and closer together. And and as you move out, they get further and further apart. But they're actually, they knew where I was, updated every 2 minutes as I was moving across. And so I left there that, got through the ice. My router said, Robert, this ice appears broken, and just start heading through it. So I've got some great video while I'm moving through it. And Mighty White Marine out of Arkansas, they're a huge John boat dealer. About a week before I left, he says, Robert, you need a breakaway on the back of your boat. And I thought I knew a lot about John boats. And he said, I don't know what a breakaway is. And he said, well, you've got I mean, y'all are duck hunters. Y'all probably know about breakaways, but it allows the motor to tip up without having to run the hydraulic cylinder, which can cause damage to your boat. So guess what? Vance sent me a free breakaway in association with Mighty White Marine. And so as I was going through that ice, my motor could tilt up as I drive over ice. And I ended up spending about 45 minutes just kind of weaving my way through the sea ice, looking for cracks in it. And one time I pushed my bow up against it and just gave it some gas and pushed the sea ice over. And I had a lot of people say, Robert, weren't you just scared to death out there by yourself, 4,000 miles from home? I said, no, I was actually laughing. It was so funny. I said, I cannot believe I am a Texan sitting in the middle of the Arctic pushing sea ice with the bow of my John boat. It was just everything I had ever hoped it would be. It was really
I'd
exciting.
have been thinking about the Titanic the whole time. That's what I would have been thinking about. Freak.
I don't know. That never crossed my mind.
So you never were worried at all, just about something terrible going on. You just kind of had this free mind, and let's just enjoy this ride and enjoy the beauty while it's here.
Well, I mean, I spent years and years. I've got over 30,000 miles of offshore experience in sailboats. I worked on commercial boats, and so I'm not just a guy that went up there and I currently hold the Guinness World Record for the longest John boat trip, and so I'm not just a beginner. I built a boat that could handle braking, and had huge bilge pumps, 2 huge bilge pumps in it, and I had lots of abandoned ship bag, and I was prepared. And in every case, I did have troubles during the trip and had some boat damage, and but in every case, I always had a plan. There was a night when after my boat had sustained some pretty critical damage, that my pumps were pretty much running all night long, and I never was thought it was going to be deadly or anything. I always had an alternative I could do, but I wasn't crazy. It wasn't a death wish or anything. It was a life wish, man. The death wish is those people that sit on their easy chairs, and the life wish is the guys that crawl in their boat on a 15-degree morning and go duck hunting, or getting a drive to the Arctic. So, I had a life wish.
Now, how did you sustain damage to your boat? You said it was during the middle of the night?
No. So, this was a huge part of the story. If you look up Canadian Broadcast Corporation, they did a really nice article on my trip. And what happened was, I had to go 650 miles up one of the roughest roads in America, or actually in the world. I sustained, in fact, I was talking with Mid-America Trailer yesterday. They're going to do some warranty work on my trailer. I broke 5 wells on my trailer, and just because you're bouncing down that road, and possibly damaged my boat there. I bought a really good boat, really good branded boat, but I was punishing this thing at a level that had been never punished. And then, they're designed to maybe go jump some stumps when you're duck hunting, but they weren't designed to go across ocean. And I was going over 1,000 miles one way and 18-inch seas. So somewhere along the way, I started shaking the internal frame of the boat apart, and the center where they weld the 2 halves together started ripping. So 1,000 miles into my trip, I was 1,000 miles east of where I launched. I pulled into that town, Cambridge Bay, and I was sleeping, and I noticed my bilge pump went off, and it just never went off. So I figured I had a crack. I'd cracked something, and it was leaking, and so I got a local to haul me out, and yeah, there was an 18-inch crack in my boat, and it concerned me, and I knew it was probably going to be the end of my journey east. I'd hoped to go another 1,000 miles east, and so I worked with some locals, and we uh, actually there's a little welding place there and a machine shop, and lots of really good people. And they helped me obtain some metal to do an outside overlay. Unfortunately, they had run out of all of their inert gas to do aluminum welding, so I had to epoxy this piece of metal over the tear. And in my heart of hearts, I knew there was probably some internal structural damage. But so I left there and was going to head back to Tuck. I was 1,000 miles from where I launched my boat, and I made it about in really rough water. I made it about 150 miles that first day with my patch. Sometime during the day, the patch came off, and that night, now my pumps were going off like every 6 or 7 minutes and pumping for a long time. And I knew that I was in a pretty critical situation where I could lose my boat. I didn't think I'd lose my life. I could always, like, I had a 150-mile run across the Coronation Gulf. A lot of it was open where I was 20 miles or more from shore, but I figured I could get to a shore and beach the boat and attempt to repair in a worst case scenario, or I could call for rescue. I'd spent money and bought $100,000 rescue policy where they would send someone out for me if I really got in trouble. And but I made it into Kuklatuck, into this little town. So I made it 340 miles with this huge tear, and I'd met this young guy and named Miles Pedersen, and we had talked when I first came there because of a weather situation on the way over. And Miles comes down and says, "Hey, Robert, what's going on? Are you okay?" And I said, "No, not okay at all. I got problems with my boat." And he this is a pure Inuit guy. He grew up there, 3 generations that I knew of Inuit that I got to meet. And he pulls his four-wheeler up there. We drag my boat on, and water is just pouring out of the center of my hull. And we climbed up under there. The crack had grown to 45 inches.
Wow.
So, I mean, huge crack. And old Miles goes, "Hey, Robert, I can fix this for you." I said, "You can fix it." And he goes, "Yeah, I can fix it. You just got to trust me." And I said, What do you think we're going to need to do to fix it?" Oh, he says, "We're going to have to take it all apart. We're going to have to pull all your tanks. We're going to have to pull your motor. We're going to have to pull all your electronics. We're going to have to drill out all the rivets. We're going to have to pull your floor." And I said, "Well, this is going to take days." He says, "Oh, no, we'll have that all done this afternoon."
What?
So, yeah. So about 4 Inuit buddies of his showed up with drills and stuff, and he had a shop, and there was, I think, at one point, 3 of them inside the boat drilling rivets and pulling stuff. So we pulled it all apart and found that basically every weld in the inside of my boat had broken. So the floor was the bottom was disconnected from the framework. And so he called his boss at the city, and he was on a journeyman program. He was first year into a journeyman program for doing large equipment repair, and part of it included welding. And he had some welding classes. And his boss that worked at the city offices in Kuklatuck, we're talking a little Inuit town of 1,300 people, said, "Yeah, bring it over to the city place." His instructor that taught the welding came over and said, "Miles is really good." And his boss spoke very highly of him. And so we lifted the motor off. They had the floor out and everything. We lifted the motor off and started the repair, man.
And did they have it done that afternoon, like he said?
Oh no, he had it all apart that
Right.
afternoon. It took 3 more days to. We had to go to the city dump, and pull metal off of other John boats, scrap metal, not John boats, they were V bottoms, but we pulled scrap metal off boats. And Miles had a 252 Miller, really nice spool gun welder, inert gas welder. It's a spool gun MIG, and he put it all back together. He used 3.5 pounds of spool gun, welding material to put it all back together. And they actually took a keel off of another boat, trimmed it, and pulled a secondary keel over the top of the broken section and welded that in place. So he made the boat better than it was when I started. And so it allowed me to make it back to my car.
What would have happened if you hadn't met this guy? You just been stuck?
I was thinking about that. I'd have probably had to have left my boat there, and maybe try to get permission from the Canadian government to sell it to someone, sell my motor, and then just fly back to my car and drive home without a boat.
Why would you have to have their Canadian government's permission?
Why
would the Canadian government have to?
Because when you come into the country, they don't want you helping people avoid taxes and stuff. So I had to sign a little document that I would bring my boat back to the United States. So it's just you'd become a seller of a boat, and you'd have to pay the taxes and all that kind of stuff.
Let me ask you this. You may not want to tell us this. How much did it cost to get your repairs done on your boat?
Nothing.
Wow. Good people up there.
What now? My next question is going to be, because people are going to ask this. They're going to say, "Why didn't you ask him that?" How much does an adventure like this run you?
It ran a whole lot more than I thought. So I spent about like 15,000 on the boat, and then just the drive up there, I'd probably dropped $5,000 on fuel.
Wow.
I mean, the gas in Canada, I went up through Saskatchewan, through the Dakotas, and I kind of crossed Canada. Didn't do that on the way back because Canadian gas is stupid expensive. And I was paying, when I got up in the Northwest Territory, I was paying close to $10 a gallon for fuel. And with that Nissan Pathfinder pulling that boat, I was only getting like 13 miles a gallon. And so I spent a lot. And the first time I filled up my boat would hold almost 100 gallons of fuel. I dropped close to $500 to fill it up with gas when I left Tuck. It's not cheap. And hotel rooms are up there $300 a night per person. And so I slept in my car. And when I'd come into towns, I didn't go stay in hotels. I slept in my boat. And first time I pulled into Kuglatuck, I did at a river that kind of comes into town. I was sleeping in my boat in the middle of the river, and about 7 o'clock in the morning, I hear this roaring jet sound, and it's a seaplane landing right beside me. I mean, they landed, and so the guy takes the seaplane and he comes around me, and I looked out of my tent out of the back of my boat. He goes, "Get the hell out of my runway." I had parked my boat right in the middle of the seaplane runway. It was pretty funny. And I went over and visited with the guy. But, those are the things you don't think about running into on Lake Travis or the Chapalaya.
Imagine hitting your credit card with them little deals. I can't even get my credit card to work in the city without them calling to make sure somebody hadn't been stolen. Are you using your credit card on the Arctic Circle for $750? Yes, I am. I need fuel.
Yeah, I contacted the 2 credit card companies that I was going to use and let them know I'd be traveling up there. And I actually called every place, every town to make sure that I would be able to use my credit cards. And I called every one of the towns and made sure that they would have fuel. I mean, because they only get resupplies up there one time a year. So they have it's typically in September, a big ship that carries barges with it, comes into a town, and they get their fuel for that year on that delivery. So, and sometimes they run out. So I had to make sure that they had gasoline. So when I pulled into a town, I could refuel.
That is nuts. Now I'm going to ask you about your John boat. I don't know much about John boats other than the ones we've owned, and they've been 8 or 10 or 12 footers that are. How big is your John boat now?
It's a 16-foot long, 56-inch wide. There's a whole lot going into this trip. There's a reason why no one's ever tried to do this before with a boat with outboard motors. The reason is the distance between the towns. I mean, the closest towns were 250 miles apart. And then if you really wanted to, and the towns were way out of the way. So if you were going to do it most efficiently, you'd need to be able to run about 700 miles without refueling. And to run 700 miles, I would want at least 30% or close to 30% safety if I run into big seas or something. So I decided that I needed a boat that was capable of running 1,000 miles without refueling. So, and then I needed a boat that was wide enough that I could load all of that gas into it and still have a place I could sleep. So that's how I came up with a 1656. I could have 12-gallon tanks lining. There were 6 tanks, 3 on each side, lining the inside of my boat. It was a wide open boat. Just had a seat in the back and a very small bow cap. And I slept between the tanks at night. And then I carried another 20 gallons in jugs behind the back seat. And yeah, that's kind of how I ended up with that boat. And I did a bunch of research. When I set the Guinness World Record, I was in a 14-foot boat with pretty low sides. It was a Tracker Grizzly. And I researched Express and Well-Built and G3 and, all the different boats. And I wanted one with extremely high sides. I wanted all welded, tall transom. And that's how I ended up with the Well-Built 1656, good heavy duty boat. Unfortunately, the dealer I purchased it from didn't tell me that they offered ice skids as an option, didn't tell me that they offered extra heavy duty gunnels. And the cool thing is when I started having the boat problems, one of the very first people that reached out to me through my InReach was Well-Built Boats. Saying, "Hey, what can we do?
Right.
Is there anything that we can do to help you?" And there really wasn't. I mean, I'm in such a remote location. There's just not much they could do to help me. But I'm actually working with them right now directly with the factory. And I will add. I have a YouTube channel called Ageless Wonder. I will do a video on it. We are going to put all of their strongest accessories into a new boat that I will use on Ageless Wonder for future trips. I'm really looking forward to the build.
Now, what is next for you?
My bucket list is long. I do a lot of adventures with my wife. We cruised up to Alaska this spring, and we want to go over to Iceland and see the Northern Lights. It's something I want to do with my wife. My wife is not the crazy adventurer that I am that wants to sleep on the side of the river and be out in the cold and stuff. She's more of a glamper, but I really enjoy traveling with her. So the next big adventure is probably Iceland. And then for me and my solo adventures, my bucket list includes, a lot of the local. I've seen the Ohio, the Mississippi, the Missouri. I've seen the Atchafalaya, the Ten Tom. I've seen a lot of the rivers. I haven't seen the Tennessee. I haven't seen the Red River. So there's some rivers I want to go explore within the United States. But then those are kind of, I call minor adventures. And then my next two big adventures are probably going to be the Great Loop. Are you familiar with that
what's
at
that?
all? Okay, the Great Loop is a trip through the central U.S. on the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. Then you take you follow the coastline all the way around the eastern United States up to Canada, and then you come. You can either cut through the canals at New York or go up to the St. Lawrence Seaway, cut across the Great Lakes back to the Illinois River in Chicago. About a 6,000-mile trip. So that's one on my bucket list, and the other one I want to do probably will be one of the first ones I do is I'll do the inland passageway up to Alaska, launch in Seattle, and then run the edge of the Pacific Ocean through the islands up to the Aleutian Islands.
That would be cool.
That was going to be cool.
We had a guy here just a couple months ago on a bachelor hunt. It was opening weekend of opening day of dove season. I had the bachelor party here, and some of the guys were from Annapolis, and a guy that was here, him and the two guys that were here took a boat from Annapolis and drove it all the way to Cleveland, and they came up the St. Lawrence River. That would be pretty interesting. So the Columbia River you didn't mention, that's not on your list because that's a wild river.
It's something I'd like to do. It's just not really high on my bucket list. It's kind of the west side of the Lewis and Clark thing. But yeah, I'd like to see the Columbia, but I mean, I'd like to get on the Red River and head up to Tulsa, Oklahoma from the Mississippi River. I just think that would be like ultra cool. And there's so many rivers that I've seen the Sabine and Oasis, and from the coast all the way up to Livingston, and I've run almost all the Texas rivers all the way to the first dam where you can't go any further. And I've paddled just about every river in Texas from the top to the bottom. I've paddled from Big Bend all the way to the coast on the Rio Grande River. And so I've done a lot of exploring by water.
Now, did you sleep well on nights that you were just going to go to sleep on the boat?
That's a really good question. It was posed to me during the trip because, you're sleeping in a boat. The water's 34 degrees. How do you handle that? And so what I did is I used a fanfold sleeping pad. They're used by backpackers, not as much today, but old time. And I used that as my base layer, and it had a radiant layer on it. And so I'd put that down first, and it went from head to toe. And then I had a really nice blow-up air mattress that I used for backpacking. And I'd lay that down, and because it was light, I brought a sleep mask to put over my eyes. But typically, since it was cold, I'd just take what I had pulled over my head and just fold it over my eyes, and I'd put earplugs in, take a couple of melatonin, and I sleep as comfortable in my boat as I do at home or in a hotel. So no, I slept like a baby.
I'd rather sleep out in the water than I would on the damn bank with the damn polar bears.
Well, the bears do. I mean, they cruise the bank, and I read everything I could, and I just crazy incident. I'm talking to this. I'm having a private messaging with this lady that is the captain of a converted tugboat, ice-breaking tugboat, been converted to a yacht. And I was asking her about what charts to use, because the Garmin charts don't work up there. You have to go get special charts to work in special chart plotters to work up in the Arctic. And she goes, well, would you like me to, get the guys that trained my crew for the Arctic? And I'll set up a video conference. And I said, well, heck yeah, let's do that. So lo and behold, it was the two Navy Special Forces guys from England that had attempted the Northwest Passage. Get this, they did it in a 17-foot sailboat with a rowing rig in it. And they didn't make it the whole way, but boy, did they have some experiences. one night they were sleeping on the bank in a little tent, and they woke up and the tent was compressed all the way down to their feet. It was a polar bear smelling their feet through the tent. And so they had a weapon with them, and they just honked their air horn, and they had probably a half dozen very close encounters with polar bears, and they actually ended up having to fire a round at a grizzly bear. No, excuse me, a grizzly. It's early in their trip, but they had a number of encounters, and that's what kind of made my decision was to polar bears swim and so do grizzlies. But with an electric fence around my boat, and electric fences they work very well against bears. I felt way more comfortable. And when I went ashore, I had a Mossberg Contender pistol grip, 3-inch Magnum, 6-shot, loaded with 3-inch Magnum double-aught bucks, and my bear spray and bear bangers. And when I went on shore, I was ready for bears.
Loaded for bear. What do you do if you got to use a bathroom when you're out there?
Use the bathroom.
Well, I had a bucket that was good for two things. Number one and number two.
And that's it.
What?
So, no, my bucket is what I used. And when I was out in the middle of nowhere, right in the bucket, if I was in a town, I was kind of in my tent, I'd just put a trash bag liner in it, in my bucket. But
was it?
My wife always says that's TMI, but
it's part of it.
When you're guys like us and you're in your deer stand and there's a bunch of deer out in front of you, you don't want to have to get out of the deer stand. You learn how to take care of those things.
You figure it out. That's all you can do.
Yeah. Wasn't the Northwest Passage open completely like in the 1700s for about 10 or 20 years?
Well, no, it's never open for sure. Every trip through the passage is an attempt even today. It was first done by a guy named Roald Amundsen in that time frame, and it was very perilous, and he had to find the right route. And you probably have heard of the Franklin expedition where he lost both of his boats, and they've been recently found, and everyone was lost. But yeah, I've read just about every account of every explorer that's ever been through the passage. But this year, the passage didn't open till like July the 29th. It got where you could go all the way through the passage. And then around August the 10th, it closed. The wind went northwest and pushed all of the ice and closed the Bellot Strait, and it closed the polar ice cap moved down to down toward Tuck, and so it's it opens, but there's still a polar ice cap that ice can get in there and close it. The prevailing wind is southeast, so when the prevailing wind runs, it pushes the polar ice cap away from Tuck and away from the western shoreline where you need to get to Baffin Bay. So now I had an ice specialist assigned to me through the Canadian Coast Guard that my router could call each day and get insight on the ice. But yeah, some years it doesn't open still today.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
that's crazy.
That's the deal.
That it could just close and, then you're stuck. Try again next year.
Well, unless you're like Mywin, that I met with her ice breaking tugboat. She could go through 3-meter ice in that tugboat. And because I was talking to her, I said, well, is there any reason why you aren't going to make it through the passage? She goes, oh no, Robert, as long as COVID's not there. It was so funny. I was really hoping I'd run into Mywin, and because the Northwest Passage people is a very small group of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, more people have been to the top of Mount Everest than have been through the Northwest Passage, and not by a little. Way more people have been to the top of the world than have been through the Northwest Passage. So I was in Cambridge Bay and my boat wasn't doing well. And I look out in the harbor and there's Mywin's tugboat coming into the harbor. And I hopped in my boat and I ran out there to her and said, "Hey, Mywin." She's out on the front of her boat. It's like a 140-foot tugboat. And going, "Hey, Robert," she said, "I can't believe you made it." And I said, "Oh, man, I made it. I got some problems." And she goes, "Well, if I can do anything to help, you just let me know." And she ended up being the one who gave me some resin to attach that patch. But I ended up having dinners on, I think, like 4 or 5 sailboats that, I knew that they were coming through the passage and we'd see each other and they'd invite me aboard. And no, it's a really tight group. And when you see each other, you go greet and tell stories.
Now, when you got the Guinness Book of World Records, did you know that you were going to be up for that, or was this something that once you completed it, they reached out to you and was like, "Hey, by the way"?
No, the Guinness World Records, I'm not as high on them as I used to be. It's a money grab, it's a way to generate money and promote a beer line. And so if you really want to get a Guinness Book of World Records, you have to apply in advance. So I applied when I went for the world record, I applied almost a year in advance, and I wanted to do it the free route. If you pay them $1,000 to get started, they do it real quick, and you can do it in a matter of weeks. It took me a year, and they have to certify that your boat is. I was going for longest continuous journey in a John boat was my record, and so they had to certify that it was a John boat. And what they mainly wanted to see, that it had a bench seat, no steering wheel. You had to steer it with a tiller, and that it was basically flat. They didn't require that it be totally flat. And they had to certify that the route would break the distance. And they sent me a bunch of forms. So twice a day, you had to find someone to sign a piece of paper that was an independent third party. You had to collect receipts with timestamps on it. And it's pretty, they kind of assure that you're getting a record. But while I was doing the trip, I got contacted by a guy who says, "Well, you're not going to really break the record because the record in Guinness was 600 miles." He says, "Well, I did an 850 miler." Another guy contacted me that did a 1,500 miler. And I'm really thankful all these guys were contacting me, so I knew how far I needed to go. And right before I finished, that guy contacts me and says, "I wrote a book. I did a 1,700-mile trip from Minneapolis to somewhere in Georgia." And I said, "Well, thank you."
I'll keep going.
So that's when I added. So my trip to get the Guinness record was I searched the United States to see what the longest trip you could make in a navigable waterway, without having to go through too many lots. I had to go through lots of them, but I ended up starting in West Virginia on a little river called the Tigard, and I went several miles down the Tigard to the Monongahela. The Monongahela is kind of famous because it's one of the 3 rivers that forms Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. And so I went down the Monongahela to Pittsburgh to the mouth of the Ohio, went the full 1,000-mile length of the Ohio to the Mississippi, Cairo, Illinois. And I went the full length of the Mississippi down to Venice. That's where I called my brother and said, "How stupid is it going to be to try to cross the Gulf tomorrow?" I went out in the Gulf, crossed 140 miles across the Gulf, and came up the Atchafalaya to Morgan City. And so I knocked out 2,244 miles in 12 days.
And then that is the record. We can safely say, with all the people reaching out to you, that's the record.
I don't think anyone's ever going to match it, but you never say never. Someone crazy as me will come along. But it's a lot of effort to
have a record. There's a lot of hoops you got to jump through.
What about the loop? What about going from the Atlantic and all the way doing that?
Well, if I do that, that'll be a 6,000 mile
That'll be
record.
amazing.
And It's just never been done in a John boat. It's been done in two girls. I can't. There's a line. It's a company their daddy owned. Did it in a relatively small outboard and did the Great Loop. It's been done in a personal watercraft, and I don't know how that guy pulled it off. It was done this year, and but no, it's just never been done by John boat. Now, and it would be I would camp right behind the Statue of Liberty, and I'd be doing lots of crazy stuff. It'd be a lot of fun.
That's crazy.
Well, I'm going to be sitting in Sodas Point, New York next month and on the St. Lawrence River. And if I see some guy coming by in a John boat, I'm thinking, that guy's going for the record right there.
He's trying to break it.
Well, man, we appreciate you being on here. You have one hell of a story, man. I'm telling you.
And you got a great outlook on life. Like just go live every day.
Yeah, don't sit in an easy chair and watch adventure shows or just listen to blogs. Go out there and get invited by these crazy guys that run this blog here, and be on it. You know, go do something that excites you and gets your heart beating, and something you have to plan for years. Because the planning and then the talk about it afterwards is pretty fun too. Although there's nothing beats being out there. But I do appreciate y'all having me on.
It's been a ton of fun, and good luck on all your future adventures. And I hope everything goes well, and stay safe out there.
I'll do it, man. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Robert
Youens.
What a story. Good Lord.
That's a long way in a John boat.
I don't like myself to be around just me for that long.
That's a lot of miles.
And that was interesting about how they pushed the Indians up there in that area.
What do you,
The Canadian government.
Oh,
where we pushed ours to Oklahoma.
Right.
They pushed theirs.
Well, Trudeau, maybe some reparations are in order.
Yeah. He didn't even give them fuckers casinos.
No.
Ain't got nothing.
But that is,
them people up there probably are better off, and they're probably enjoying life
Eskimo
better.
being this derogatory term. Well,
Yep.
Wasn't the evil white man that gave it to you.
Nope. That was interesting.
It was those Native Americans, those racist ass Native Americans. Those are the ones that started calling you Eskimo.
Very interesting man. Proud
It
Texan.
is.
Very proud
Very
Texan.
proud, and tell you what, he's got a great attitude on him.
Yes, he does. Really good deal. That's where you're supposed to live your life right there. Find you something you're passionate about and go live it. Well, thank y'all so much for listening to us. God bless y'all, and have a great week.
Go check out all of our great sponsors. Listen, there's a couple promo codes you need to be aware of. With Pacific Calls, it is BHP25. Save yourself 25%. Dirty Duck Coffee, Big Honker saves you 15% off at purchase. We are also brought to you by Ducks Unlimited, Stanfield Hunting Outfitters, Bangtail Whiskey, Dive Bomb Industries, Boss Shot Shell, Pacific Calls, Gundog Outdoors, Shin Gear Waders, Lucky Duck, Looking Glass Podcast, Alpha Outdoor Specialties, and Double T British Kennels.